So what I'm hoping to do today, kind of my perspective, is to tell you, from what I understand, you guys have already had a talk about what SAFE is. So I'll just do kind of a quick refresher on that. And then I'll talk about kind of how we're implementing it in our program. And what we've learned so far. And I'm really going to focus in on some of the successes we had, but some of the challenges that we're having that we think our assumption is that some other quality improvement initiatives could help, or tools could help deal with. And then we'll just kind of also talk about what else we need. So I'm going to use the slides more as a conversation starter. So please, again, I'm going to go through the slides, but I'm going to leave ample time for you guys to ask me questions or comment on what it is that we're doing. You know, the slide presentation part of it's going to be pretty brief, and then the rest of the time I'm hoping I can just have a conversation and you know, learn from this community. So that's kind of my how I'm going to approach this today. So let's just jump right into the SAFE overview. So I really wanted to start with Agile. Agile is really an umbrella term for a lot of different things, and I always like to remind myself and the teams that I coach what the manifesto says and what those principles are whenever we're making decisions about whether to do something different. So I always like to start all of my kind of information sessions with that as well. And again, this is a challenge for our organization, is transitioning to this mindset of using the manifesto and principles as kind of our guide. That is you know, just a challenge for our organization. So I always like to bring it up and make sure that I remind myself that this is the direction that we would like to go in. So I know most of you know this, but some Agile frameworks or methodologies, there's lots and lots of them. And in our organization, we have learned that we can't use just one. For example, we can't just make everyone in our organization a Scrum team. We need to make sure that we use a framework or methodology that works for the teams. So when we talk about what the teams look like in our organization, I just want to remind us that all of these teams could look a little bit different. They're not necessarily all Scrum teams, nor are they only teams that develop software, right? We're really embracing that DevOps mindset or DevSecOps mindset of the operations side of the house being just as involved in using these principles as the product side of the house. So again, just to remind us what SAFE is, SAFE for Lean Enterprises uses Lean, Agile, and DevOps as an operating system to help us scale some of the goodness out of Lean and Agile for our large organization. For us, we have about 800 people here at China Lake that we consider part of our integrated product team, but we also have about 400 at Boeing, and then we have various other groups that we integrate with frequently. And so when you look at our Agile organization, it's about 1,200 people today, 1,300 depending on which groups you bring in. So again, it's really large. It's difficult to scale some of the Agile principles, which is why we use SAFE as the framework to do that. It is completely configurable and customizable. And so most organizations that I've interacted with have had to tailor SAFE to meet their needs, and that's no exception with our group as well. So I think I already really talked to this, but SAFE, you know, again, we use a set of principles, practices, and tools. So we use Scrum, we use Kanban, we use value stream identification and management. We use Lean a lot for managing our batch sizes, limiting our amount of work in progress. And we use we want to use more of a quality management system to enable the flow of work and to accelerate that flow of work. So teams are now being formed around a long-lived product as opposed to a project. So that was a big shift in our organization, right? We were used to setting up projects, lots of projects in the organization, and I think most of us know that there are trade-offs that you have to make when you start and stop projects. And so we've created these long-lived teams around products that we develop. So that's a little bit different. These core values in SAFE are built-in quality, transparency, alignment, and program execution. I'm not going to get into a lot of that today, but you can see that when we are having conversations, we're making sure that we are living these core values every time we make a decision. So this is just a little reminder of the Lean Agile mindset and principles for SAFE. So we have what's called the SAFE House of Lean and our SAFE principles. And again, we just use these to help guide us in how we should adapt the framework for our organization. All right, so what we're doing at our IPT. Currently, we have 8 Agile release trains. So an Agile release train is just a team of teams who create a product. And they consist, those ARTs contain both Boeing and IPT members. Most of those ARTs are focused on producing BRR type software. So again, that's software that is a build that is ready to be tested in an in-the-loop lab of some sort, or could potentially be put on an aircraft. But typically there's another step that goes in between there. So that's where our focus has been, is for these teams to create that type of software, and it's integrated. Some of the experiment, an experiment that we have in work is an on-aircraft testing ART. So this is an Agile release train, so a team of teams that are that accept work from our design agents. So that's either Boeing or our internal design agents in the form of a deliverable that is ready to have some development test performed on an aircraft. And so that's an experiment that we're doing right now. There's other teams at the IPT that are evaluating whether their team members should be on that on-aircraft ART, or if they should be integrated into the development ARTs. And that really just is a conversation about those handoffs between the teams and how we can improve or smooth out that handoff process. We have scaled up to the solution level. This is actually, we did this, I want to say 2 PIs ago, so around 6 months ago, we scaled up to the solution level. So we have a solution level team that consists of Boeing and IPT personnel leaders who prioritize and manage all of the work for the team. So everything that we traditionally had in our large, we call them software configuration sets, and we had multiples of those that are going on at the same time. They're now being, the new capability and all of the work are being prioritized and managed by a single solution team, which is different for us. Normally, we kind of had SCS block managers that were just responsible for their one project. And so again, this is kind of in that mindset shift from going from product line, going from projects to more product line thinking. We also have one set of Agile business teams that are using SAFE principles and practices to synchronize planning. And this is probably part of that DevOps piece, right? We have a number of teams who support product teams or support activities that the product teams use. And so we've created these Agile business teams that are starting to use SAFE principles and practices to synchronize their planning. So again, they're forming Agile teams. They're using one of the agile methodologies, for example, Scrum, Kanban, behavior-driven development, things like that. But these teams are typically not what we would think of as software teams. CMDM, we have our enterprise data fusion teams, we have our information technology and cybersecurity, and a number of others, but those are just a few. And these teams are starting to get used to using PI planning, creating features and delivering on those features, and making sure that all of their work is transparent and aligns to a higher level initiative at the organization. So some of the things that we're working on, or that we have worked on very recently, or that are in work, is a release strategy. So again, we used to deliver in large SCS blocks. They were multi-year projects, and now we're looking at some opportunities to do some asynchronous software releases to our fleet users. So rather than have a large block release to them, have a specific capability released to a specific squadron that may need it. We're looking at developing minimum viable products, or MVPs, for capabilities to allow us to incrementally and iteratively develop those capabilities. We're also looking at bringing in more of our value stream. I think I talked that most of the time, or in most cases, we develop work from SFR to BRR. So defining the requirement to delivering the build, the software build, is done in using these agile principles and practices, but we're looking to expand that and bring in some post-BRR work or some pre-SFR work. And so some negotiations are going on, and some conversations are going on around what that could look like. And we're continuing to discuss this and get support from our program offices, and especially in regard to the test and evaluation and logistics teams, to see if we can integrate more of their activities and or the products they produce or need to be produced into our development activities using SAFe. So what we've learned so far, and I guess I really didn't talk about how long we've been on this journey, so I'll take a second to do that. We started, we made the decision to implement SAFe, and it was just the essential level of SAFe, meaning we had one agile release train. There was 5 or 6 teams on that agile release train, and we started in about mid-2019 with that small group of people, and we called it an experiment for a long time. I think some people might still be calling it an experiment, but we started with that small group of people, and again, it's expanded to what I just showed you, right? 8 agile release trains, probably close to around 600 people that are on an agile team on one of those agile release trains. So it's become quite large in just that short amount of time. Again, started mid 2019. And now this is where we're at today. So these are some things that we've learned, and I just wanted to share some of the successes that we've seen. From the teams, and again, starting at the very bottom, the teams and the individuals on the teams, they're able to work from a single set of priorities. That's huge for our teams. They don't have, 17 high-ranking or high pay individuals that are telling them what their priority is. They work from a single set of priorities. Each of those priorities align to either a business initiative for the IPT or a specific capability. So it's been really nice for the teams to be able to get that alignment and that transparency from their work to one of those. Our business owners and our program offices, and that includes, PMA 265 is our biggest one, but we have a lot of other program offices or customers that we deal with, and they're engaged throughout the PI. They interact with teams individually. They negotiate scope of work based on, all the constraints, time, funding, all those things. They negotiate with the teams, and they are actually communicating new work in a more productive way. So rather than go tell the team, hey, I need you to work on this thing because it came across my desk today, they're working in the boundaries of program increment planning, which again has made the teams feel more empowered to do the work that they've committed to. The other thing is we have our teams demonstrating working software to our end users, our air crew, frequently. And when I say frequently, I mean like weekly. Our air crew are getting access to the software that's being developed and being able to provide feedback on that software right there, and make real-time changes if they need to the code. And that's been huge. We have a group of air crew who have just been really big champions of SAFE and empowering these teams. So that's been super successful. We actually were able to complete, or the teams were able to complete a complete statement of requirement within one PI. So that's a full piece of functioning capability within a single 13-week increment. This would have typically taken us 2 to 3 years with our traditional processes. So that was a huge win for the team, and they actually, yeah, I imagine that they will be able to do that more often. This one just happened to be a smaller one that could be completed in that time. There's a huge increase in communication and collaboration between Boeing, which again are our design agents, and the IPT, which is more of the test side of the house. And those collaborations, we've always been very supportive of each other, but now the increase and the results of those collaborations have been just a higher quality product in a shorter amount of time. So we've seen some really big gains there. And then again, our solution and portfolio levels, engagement with our program offices have been really have been increasing, and that's enabled us to do what we actually have done already. But I don't want to discount that we still have our challenges. And I'm going to say, I should have just put at the top, these are not new challenges. These are challenges that our organization has had for a while. But with the implementation of SAFE, they have not gone away, and they've actually highlighted some of them just in more detail. So one of them is contracts and funding. Again, nothing new. Some of the challenges we have always experienced don't go away with SAFE. In fact, new challenges have been highlighted that show that our contract could be inhibiting us from being more effective with our agile processes. Quality metrics, again, there's nothing really new here. We've always had a challenge with creating a set of metrics that satisfy our customer needs, but we are finding it difficult to measure the quality of software and technical documentation because of how we've implemented some of the agile practices. Predictability. It's very difficult to predict today when a capability will be ready for a fleet user, and that's because of the different logistics aspects and the different ways that we have to test it before it can be delivered to them. So again, nothing new here. It's just being highlighted as again, Agile didn't solve that problem. And then cost and schedule metrics. Contractors are still required to use EVM, and it's still a good tool, but we need to make some changes as we transition to allow our teams to take on more of that estimating responsibility. So here's some things that we really need to do. We haven't really done anything with these. A lean quality management system is something that we didn't have implemented before Agile, and now we're just realizing that we need this in addition to SAFE. We need to look at the handoffs between different teams to see if we can limit the delays. Sorry, Jim. Yes, it's F18. I'm trying to pay attention to the chat. So I'll try and I see there's a couple. Yep, Jeff just gave a clarification, and yes, Jim, that's F18. Thanks. We're looking at the handoffs between development teams and test teams and seeing how we can make improvements to those handoffs, because those are one of our significant causes of delay. So we're looking at seeing where we can improve that. And then, of course, DevSecOps, increasing the use of those, especially when it comes to automated testing, product line engineering, and the continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline. So we don't have good tools in place to allow for sufficient automated testing, just as an example. And so there's a whole group of people who are working on looking at that and seeing how we can do better. Yeah, so what's next? So these are some focus areas for the next year for us. That we have as initiatives in the organization. So again, decreasing that handoff delay between development and test teams, establishing a set of metrics that allow us to manage and track progress, updating our estimating processes to include incremental and iterative development. So rather than having a large upfront estimate, how can we change that to align with more what the teams are doing? Creating MVPs for all of our statement of requirements prior to SFR, so that those are known and communicated before teams start working on them, and then establishing that release management plan that can enable those asynchronous deliveries to the fleet. So again, those are things that we're actively working on today and seeing what different tools we can bring in, what different methodologies we can bring in, what new processes we can bring in to address some of these. All right, so again, I said my slides were going to be pretty brief. I didn't lie, so that's good news. So now I'm just going to kind of open it up for questions and or comments. If you need me to go back to a slide, please let me know. Yeah, I'll kind of be quiet for a second and see if anyone has any questions.
And you can ask your questions. You feel free to unmute and ask your questions, or feel free to put them in the chat.
Kimberly, this is Steve Shook. You mentioned toward the beginning of your presentation that I think I'll paraphrase that agile thinking is a little bit of a challenge, or the transition to agile thinking is a little bit of a challenge for the organization. I was just wondering why that is, and is it something that's specific to your organization that's making it that way, or do you find that to be kind of a common challenge with a lot of organizations?
Yeah, great question, Steve. I think it's a common challenge for a lot of organizations, especially if they are hierarchical in any way. As a Navy organization, we have, chain of commands, and implementing some of the principles, for example, decentralized decision making, that's hard, right? To change that mindset around that, to allow to have the confidence in the teams to allow them to make those good decisions. I think that's where the challenge is, but I don't think that's unique to the Navy. I think that's when I've talked to others, it's pretty typical of them too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And this is Jeff Schwab. As I mentioned in my chat note, supporting what Kimberly is bringing up here, we're looking now at bringing in some of the team process and process dashboard kinds of capabilities, metrics, etc., into the possible improvement of how we can better, do estimating, tracking, and looking at our progress in each of within the PIs and each of the sprint cycles in them for, across all of these teams that are doing software development and all kinds of other engineering development and support across the entire F-18 SAFE organization. Over.
So Kimberly, this is Julia. So, like in your bio, you say you do a lot of regular training and coaching. So, what kind of training do you find most effective, and what kind of training do the teams need mostly?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our training strategy or the thoughts around training has really evolved over the implementation, right? And so I think that there are 3 different types of trainings, and I'm using quotes. I know you can't see me, but I'm using air quotes around the training. So we have our typical certification courses in SAFe, right? SAFe is a very robust framework that has a number of really great training courses that they offer. So they have, for Scrum Masters, for product owners, for teams, new teams that are forming, even for understanding how to do DevOps in SAFe. There are a number of classes. So I teach those classes on a regular cadence every PI. So for example, every PI I do 4 certification type courses in SAFe specifically. And then we also have just a number of kind of ad hoc or as needed trainings or information sessions around the Agile Manifesto and some practices. So again, that could be that we go in and we teach someone how to be a Scrum team, for example, or we teach someone how to set up and use a Kanban with their workflow. So we do that type of training as well. And then the other one that we do is we really hold a set of kind of facilitated conversations. Again, I'm a SAFe program consultant, so one of the pieces of my job is teaching training, but another piece of my job is coaching teams in using these principles and practices in their daily work. And so one of the other approaches that we take is going in and kind of finding out what the teams are doing and seeing maybe which principle or practice they want to implement or try next. And so, and usually that is held with a facilitated conversation about what problems they're having, what do they want to improve. Did that answer the question for you, Julia?
No, that was really good. I have another question, but I'll wait and see if other people have questions before I ask it. Got a quiet group today. All right, I'll ask my other question. So, curious, like one of the things I really admire about our organization, the Alliance, is we really walk our talk. So I'm just curious to know how you on your team, your improvement teams, how you use SAFe. Have you been able to adapt it to your coaching work, and how does that work and everything like that?
Yeah, so you're asking how I operate on an Agile team? Is that kind of what you're asking?
How you apply like the SAFe principles that you were talking about with your software teams to the work you do? Like, are you able to, sort of apply, like, do you guys use Kanbans and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, great. Okay, I think I understand the question. So there are a couple of areas that I see how I am able to use these principles to guide my work. First of all, I am part of a Kanban team. We have a Kanban board and a Kanban system that we use where we have, and we use daily stand-ups where we, talk about what we did yesterday, what we're working on today, what's getting in our way. So same type of thing that we do. And then we make, we have these times when we get together and look at improvements we can make to our Kanban system. So number one, I actually am part of an Agile team and use it to manage all of the work that our team does as part of the Lean-Agile Center of Excellence. But the other thing that we do that I'm able to do is we really focus on applying a systems thinking when we're making improvements or when we're recommending improvements to a team and or a set of teams. We're looking at what that means for the entire organization. So for example, when we're looking at asking a team to start to use SAFe and or Agile principles, we are deliberate in that team getting the help that they need to number one, do those activities, and number two, it makes sense for them to kind of join the train. We don't kind of, you know what does that make sense? Like they're the kind of, we're trying to improve something with making them go agile that is improving the entire organization, rather than coming in and saying, you know, you're going to go agile because I said so, right? We are able to show those connections between why we want them to start doing something differently. It usually has something to do with there's some dependencies between another team that we're trying to resolve. So again, we kind of use that whole life cycle of our organization to make these improvements. Does that make sense? Or does that answer your question?
No, that answered my question. It's actually one of the best answers I've heard to that question in a long time. So no,
yay.
I admire that. That sounds really good.
I'm going to give myself a gold star then, Julia. Is that okay?
Hey, Kimberly. Yeah, this is Steve again. You mentioned earlier in the presentation that what you saw as one of the key successes is that the teams are now working from kind of a single set of priorities. So I think you talked a little bit about how that happened, but I wondered if you can elaborate a little bit more about the mechanics of how that happens in SAFE, and specifically how it happens in your organization.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring up the SAFE big picture because I think it's easier to talk to that. So what was happening before was that, for example, we had probably 5 or 6 large system configuration sets that were in work at the time. And that didn't include individual products like weapons or other products that we had in development, but we were using the same resources for all of them. So for example, a software developer could be working on something in a single day for every single one of those active projects. And really what happened was, like, you know, we've heard about the squeaky wheel, or do you guys know what the hippo is? The highest paid person in the room, or there's a number of other things. Whoever was the loudest or was the biggest boss was the one that was setting priorities. Again, each of those had their individual schedules that they had to meet. They had individual requirements that they had to meet, and our engineers or our developers or our team members were having to make those to decide what to work on first, right? With all of that information. What changed with SAFE was that we made those people, all of those block managers, those SES block managers, and those product owners had to get in a room with the set of work that they needed done, and they had to negotiate on priority. So we started with about I think it was 10 or 12 different priorities. Today on our solution train, we have about 122 items that are prioritized every single program increment. And so teams know what the highest priority item is. And so they know that's what their focus is on until that thing is done, and then they move on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Kim, this is Tim McHale. Was that between IPT and Boeing, or is that just within the IPT that you're talking about, that conversation?
It was both. Okay. It was both. Yeah. Yep. So leadership from both of those were in the room and are in the room making those negotiations.
Okay. I have a bit of a nerdy SAFE question.
Great. I love those.
Okay. And that is, to what extent have you implemented lean portfolio management, and how does that work?
Yeah, great question. Not much. If you know anything about lean portfolio management, you know how it has to do with funding value streams and changing the way that we fund things.
Yeah, and that's why I'm asking the question. I'm an SBC also, and watching the pain of that transition in my second organization now, and I was wondering how the Navy was dealing with it. Actually, I've been wondering how government in general has been dealing with it.
Yeah, I think I was trying to be pretty deliberate and say we're only at the large solution level because we have a lot of constraints when it talks about implementing the portfolio level. However, we're starting to have those conversations, and the GAO released a study and are trying an experiment about taking off the color of money for some projects,
Yes.
which would enable us to bring in more of those lean portfolio management practices. So we'll see. Today we're not doing it, right? We really get we get funded the same way we've always gotten funded, and we get work the same way that we've always gotten work. It's internal to the IPT how we prioritize and break up that work for the teams.
So Kimberly, another question. Does SAFE help you overcome like the cultural issues between Boeing and NavAir, like having these teams, you know, like just coming from very different cultures and very different backgrounds?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, what I've been lucky enough to be on this journey from the very beginning. And so I have seen just a complete change in even how we refer to each other. You know, it's not Boeing versus, you know, us. It's
not them.
Yeah, it's really more of, especially at the team level. The team level is really where you really see it. Again, we have teams that are made up of Boeing personnel and IPT personnel on a single team. And some of those teams, I would call them, you know, our higher performing teams, because that relationship is so synchronous now, where it wasn't before.
Other questions for Kimberly?
I think I have one more, and that's about the tool set that you use to manage the work within Scaled Agile, and you know, within the IPT and all the release trains and so forth. You know, we'd see that most Agile teams that are just using like straight Scrum or maybe Kanban or whatever, they're using Jira. When you're scaling up to Scaled Agile, what does that tool set look like on the ground for different categories of people?
Yeah, great question. Again, you guys have some awesome questions. So that is one of our challenges, is we have a set of tools that we're using, and so not really an integrated solution level single tool that's helping us. Typically teams use Jira. Jira has a number of plugins that are that we use to get that scaling information that we need. So for example, we have a solution kind of roadmap and solution backlog that's a plugin that we got from Jira. We use a system called OSEE, and I'm totally drawing a blank on what OSEE stands for. Open source engineering, I can't remember. Does anyone know what it stands for? Anyways, which is an environment that we're hopefully transitioning to be able to use, you know, our requirements and automated test environments and things like that. But we also have groups that are using Azure DevOps. So think our internal IT teams, things like that. Yeah, I think the tools piece is what is prohibiting us from being more effective, if you want my honest opinion, Steve.
Okay, so yeah, I'm hearing kind of the classic Agile kinds of tool support, like Jira and Azure DevOps, and
yeah,
with some plugins to help out, but maybe not as robust as you would hope. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, one last question. How does SAFE help you with like product quality and product value, like distinguishing those two concepts and measuring them and tracking them, and how the teams react to value and quality?
Yeah, so again, built-in quality is one of the core values of SAFe. And so we really bring quality down to the lowest level that we can. So on every user story, for example, or every story in the backlog, there is typically an acceptance criteria on that story, which is what quality do we accept when this thing is done? What does it mean for it to be done? And that usually has to do, on the development side, that it's passed some sort of quality verification. And so we do it down at the lowest level for quality. Again, we need a more robust quality management system at the larger level to see that we're getting quality capabilities as opposed to quality stories. I think is probably where we're missing a little bit. And then value, what SAFe does in regards to value is we have, there's a concept called our objectives, and every program increment has a set of objectives for each art, and those objectives are scored based on the value that they're bringing either the business or the customer. And so we track that. We track what kind of value we're delivering, right? Yeah. And so I think that's in SAFe, it's really important to talk about both. Just because you have something of quality doesn't necessarily mean you delivered something of value to the customer, and vice versa. Just because you delivered something that the customer thinks is value doesn't mean that it met a quality standard that you've already accepted. So.
Now, I was excited to see that both those concepts were included and handled separately, because I agree with you. They're separate and distinct.
Yeah.
But related.
They're related for sure, but they are separate and distinct, which is another one of those concepts that the teams are struggling with. I'll just be honest.
I want to ask everybody to join me in thanking you for a really fascinating presentation. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I love the virtual claps. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Kimberly.